This is the final episode of season 2 of Highly Sensitive Money. In this episode, I welcome Bianca Wilson, a former client and a fellow highly sensitive person, to discuss her journey to financial transformation. Bianca, an emotional freedom technique practitioner and mindful communication facilitator, shares how her sensitivity both challenges and enhances her professional and personal life. The conversation delves into her upbringing, the complexities of money and identity, and how she has redefined her relationship with money as a highly sensitive person. Bianca highlights her journey of implementing financial structures, managing entrepreneurial income, and the importance of self-care and rest. She also discusses the intersection of her sensitivity with social justice and the diverse ways she helps others, highly sensitive professionals and creatives through her work. Welcome to Highly Sensitive Money. I'm really excited to have Bianca Wilson today as our guest. Bianca is both a former client and she's also a highly sensitive person. So I'm excited to hear your journey of money and your journey of money transformation.
Thanks for having me. You are such an important part of my money conversation. So I can't think of a better person to be talking about money and being highly sensitive. And I feel like I never put those two together, like as a concept or as like an identity, but it's a really important conversation. So thanks for having me.
So Bianca, what is it that you do for work? What is your profession?
I am a emotional freedom technique practitioner, or EFT, or tapping, goes by a variety of names. And I'm also a mindful communication facilitator. So I work with groups and organizations around conflict and around cooperation and generative conflict. And I often use my practice of being an EFT practitioner and bringing the somatics or the body into conflict and what it means to navigate like our nervous system responses and how it impacts our communication and just, really light work, really fun, light work. Not heavy at all.
Yeah. And how do you think that being a highly sensitive person affects that work?
On the positive side, which is I would say at this point in my career is mostly positive. I think being highly sensitive and again like the gifts of being highly sensitive is being really attuned to other people's experiences, other people's emotional layout, like what they're experiencing emotionally, being able to connect with people on a deeper level. Again, these are like broad strokes, like, being highly sensitive is such a huge range. This is just my personal experience with being highly sensitive. I think being really attuned to, and this is more intuitive, but I think being highly sensitive naturally comes being very intuitive. And so with that, being able to kind of sense the unspoken, sense maybe the unseen, and being able to use that to deepen a conversation, deepen topics, deepen my perspective, deepen my worldview. And so I think that in the positive, it deepens in a lot of ways that I think aren't possible when you maybe don't have access to that. I would say the challenging side of that is, because there is so much attunement to there's more sensitivity, right? So it requires having better boundaries. It requires um the awareness of other people's emotions so you're not absorbing other people's stuff. Because it can be really easy because you're so attuned to take on other people's emotional experiences. So it's less of a maybe not a challenge, but just something to always be aware of. And so in my work, when I'm working specifically with emotional experiences, it's kind of this ongoing thing of like being tuned in, but not so tuned in, or I'm lost in another's experience. So yeah, it's always a dance. It's a dance that I love, but it's definitely a dance.
I was sharing with you that the second time I heard the term highly sensitive person was actually a question from you. Like, I think you said something along the lines of like us that are like us as HSPs or us serving HSPs. And at the time, I was like, my first impression of the label highly sensitive person, I thought it was weak, honestly, because like the word sensitive in
Yeah.
my mind felt like weak. You should like numb out is really what I thought I should be doing. And when I heard that question from you, I was like, oh, that's not me. And then, of course, I kept hearing it again. And now I see that it's part of how I move in the world.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
Yeah.
that you shared the term with me.
Yeah, I'm grateful that it resonated with you. I'm grateful that it's like impacted your work. Clearly, you have a whole podcast now about it, which is amazing. And yeah, and I'm grateful that I over the years have like moved through the different kind of chapters of what it is meant for me personally to be highly sensitive and really reached a point where years ago it became clear to me that it was a gift when for so long before that and most of my life I would not have done, and the world told me it wasn't a gift, and the world still will tell me in a lot of ways it is not a gift, but I don't really hear that anymore. All I hear is like it's a gift when it's used correctly and you have the tools, to navigate it.
Yeah, that's how I explain it now to people. It's like you're just receiving more information, and it's 15 to 30% of the population. It's not that rare. That's another
Yeah.
thing that like makes it easier to manage. How did you come around to the term? Like how did you hear of it?
I heard the term back in 2013, 2012, 2012. So 12, long time ago. I was having what I would say now was like maybe a spiritual awakening, but at the time felt completely like a nervous breakdown because I was functioning in a way that was and had been functioning in a way that was so incongruent with who I fundamentally was, like being in these really high pace, high demand, high stress environments my entire life, pretending like I wasn't deeply emotional when I really was, pretending like I was this hard ass, to use my language, when really I am a hard ass, but like I'm extremely sensitive and very deep feeling. And I had never addressed any of those things. And I had multiple points in my life where I had gotten kind of like glimpses of like, you are not what you appear to be. And what you appear to be is like very different than who you are. And it just made so much sense that I would get slapped in the face with like the disparity. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And when I went into therapy, I couldn't understand what was going on. I felt like I was having like everything was unraveling. And in that unravel, I realized I was like, oh, because I'm moving through the world in a way that's not congruent with who I really am. And I actually do feel a lot. And I pretend like, these things don't impact me when they really do impact me. So I first heard the phrase from Cheryl Paul, who's a wonderful Jungian psychologist, author, and she writes extensively about being highly sensitive. And then I got deeper into Dr. Elaine's work about being a highly sensitive person. So it's been like at least a decade or integrating that as a part of my identity and infusing it with my life. And I'm not an expert by any means, but it is a huge role in my personal and my professional life. Like it dictates, a lot, if not everything that I do.
You said it influences everything that you do?
Yeah, it influences and impacts really like everything, every facet of my life at this point. Because if I don't incorporate it, it's not a good look. If I just pretend like this isn't going to impact me, it never ends well for anyone.
Yeah. So now let's bring in the topic of money,
Right.
right? And how do you feel that like being highly sensitive has affected your money? And actually, let's start off with like my favorite question of like, what was the financial background of your childhood? And how do you think it may continue to affect you today?
So I grew up mostly an only child. My dad has two children from a previous marriage before me who were quite a bit older. So for all intents and circumstances, I was an only child with my parents. I grew up in a predominantly Black upper middle class neighborhood in Los Angeles, Dara Heights. And so my experience growing up was that up until I was about 5 or 6, we lived in a very small apartment. And I don't recall thinking about money. I don't recall money being like a thing. And I think for the most part throughout my life, that's been an interesting concept of like, it wasn't a conversation for so many years. And then distinctly when I was like probably in when I turned 6, we moved into this much bigger house, this much nicer neighborhood, and it was a massive shift in like my reality. But no one talked about it. You know what I mean? We didn't talk about it. It just kind of happened. And so as my parents kept, doing better with their jobs, like there was nicer things coming in, and there was, like the up level, quote unquote, of the lifestyle. And with that came interesting experiences, like going to a predominantly Black and Latino elementary school. I was suddenly like in a different class, and that became and there was like different treatment and I was almost like ashamed, right? Like I didn't like fit in with people in the same way because now suddenly my mom drove a Mercedes and like no one else, and you know what I mean? Like no one else, and I felt like, oh my God, I don't want to be that person. So it was like there was almost like shame associated pretty early on. And my mother was very showy, and I never wanted to be like that. So I think I learned very early on, like, oh no, like you don't want to be like that. That's so embarrassing. Like that's so awkward. And then the same thing happened. I changed schools. I went to a really nice private school that was predominantly white. And then I was surrounded by like FU money all the time. And that was confusing too, because before I had been the outcast because I was in a different, class. And then now I'm like considered not one of the standard wealthy ones. So it was just this really uncomfortable, constant relationship with money that was ever unfolding, but never talked about. Like money just like wasn't, it just kind of, it was like, oh, we suddenly have nice things, but no one like talked about it. I saw my dad working endlessly and so hard. My dad worked like literally till my dad worked until he was 80. So the man has historically just been this workaholic. So I think there was two things. I think I learned that money was like not something that we talked about, but at the same time, you have to work really, really, really hard to have money. And then later on in life, I found out that my parents refinanced the nice house that we had multiple times to buy a lot of these nice things. So then I was like, I don't understand if we've ever had money. Like you worked this hard, but have we ever had money? So it was a very kind of like confronting experience when I came to realize that money seemed like an illusion. Like all of these things that we'd had were kind of, I'm like, was this even ever real? Because now y'all are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt on this house because you took money out of it. So all those years that you worked so hard, what was it for? So I've had to untangle a lot of that and become more comfortable with, having sometimes difficult conversations about money.
So you've been the one that's initiated money conversations with your parents? Talk about like parental roles being a little reversed.
I would say growing up, my parents, they didn't they didn't hide money from me. It was very much, I don't know if this was your experience or not, but my experience in like this generation was like, oh, politics and money, we don't talk about those things. I mean, you don't talk about money and politics with friends. It's very like respectability politics, like we keep the appearance, we don't do that. Behind closed doors, I knew that they were talking about money, but they never had direct conversations really with me. They had me on an allowance, you know what I mean? Like there was very much instilled in me that like you earn money, right? They didn't just like freely give out money to me. But at the same time, they also were like, we always have your back. You know what I mean? Like there was always this constant, like your parents always have your back. So that was both comforting, but I also think it was a little bit of a crutch because they should have been having, in my perspective, just different conversations about money. So I don't know if I would say I'm the one who's like brought it up, but I think I have made them have clearer conversations about money with me, particularly when we had to deal with selling the house. When I had to deal with my student loans and when we had to deal with selling the childhood house, there was no choice. I was like, we have to talk about this. This is crazy. How did this happen? So that's when it started to get a little bit more involved. But even at that, it still feels very much like they're always a little bit hiding something.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned it, right? There's such a taboo about talking about money. A lot of us just feel like if we share anything around our money, it better be positive, right? It's always, and I think it's so common that we're all just like, I was actually talking with a client earlier today who was comparing herself to other people. And I reminded her, like, only people who are set up are going to be sharing that. It's very rare that people are going to be sharing when they're not doing well.
Totally. Totally. I actually have a really good friend. I think I recommended their book and um, perhaps as a guest, but my good friend just has been open, is being very open right now in their social media life and just in general about what it really looks like to be an entrepreneur, to be an artist, and someone who is their art and their artistry and their creativity is their access to their income, right? Like their income is based off of that. And they were just talking about in this current moment, like they're not like it's really hard. Like they're in a financial struggle. And we're going to be doing an event soon. And I was like, feel like we both were like, we feel like we should talk about this more about how much we like keep this in the dark and like shame ourselves when we're not doing well financially, as if like it means something around the lines of like, you don't know how to take care of yourself, you're not doing enough, you are, you're not trying hard enough, you're not smart enough, like why can't you figure this out? All these kind of things I think that we associate, our worth or how good we are, quote unquote, with the amount of money we have, when the reality is like so many times in our life, especially as an entrepreneur, you're gonna be in these like low moments and it's freaking hard, but no one talks about it. Everyone only wants to talk about like when you get to the successful point and how you made it. And I'm like, okay, but what about all those points when you're eating tuna on a piece of bread, like my friend is talking about that they're doing right now?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And that's I remember also hearing that like entrepreneurs, we have like this delusion of our possibility of success because only then
Yeah,
would you even be willing to like take the risk of entrepreneurship,
right, right,
right?
yeah,
So tell me about like I remember so we first worked together through Wilska Money, which is a group coaching program that I was doing a few years ago. What led you to look for money coaching? Do you remember?
yeah, I do. I think it was that as an entrepreneur, my income had been so up and down, like big amounts, no amounts, just very standard entrepreneur stuff. But I realized that I was just not, I was like, there has to be a different way to handle this because I am not handling it. And by handling it, I literally mean logistically, like planning things out and tangibly speaking, handling my money. But I also knew from my own work, and I'm like, okay, well, there's also emotion behind this. Like, it can't just be I'm physically unsure of what to do with, money in these different circumstances. But I'm like, but I also am pretty sure that there's like some stories as with all of us that is also impacting my decisions around money where I keep getting myself into these patterns that are not healthy that I kept clearly seeing.
You were feeling that because like there were emotions attached to money. So it was more about like it wasn't just handling the unpredictable income. It was also like understanding what the emotions may have been.
Yeah, because I could tell there was just a lot of shame. Like I could sense that there was a lot of shame around money, like for different reasons. One, like, why haven't I figured this out by now? Why, it's been X amount of years that I've been doing entrepreneurship. Why have I not? Why is my income not quote unquote more stable? Why am I back in debt again? Like just these patterns, these these points of shame that I was like tired of feeling.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think being highly sensitive was affecting your money then? Or
Well, I think in general, like being highly sensitive, you just generally feel things on a deeper level. So I just feel like when you feel shame, you like really feel shame. And when you feel joy, you can really feel joy. But when you feel sadness, you really feel sadness. Like it's like, things are just more intense. Like, things are just really amplified. So I think that had a major thing. And I think being highly sensitive comes a lot with perfectionism. Like there's a lot of perfectionism associated with highly sensitive, again, because you feel things so deeply. Again, broad strokes, not for everyone, my experience, but it's also been my experience with people that I've worked with and other highly sensitive friends that I have. And so I just felt like I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong, which I won't lie, partially drove me to get additional help around, because I was like, well, I'm clearly like, I'm a bad person. Like it then equates to like, highly sensitive can also like can become so hard on yourself that I could tell that I was like, this is not healthy. Like I'm being so hard on myself, and there has to be I need additional support around this. I'm not, I'm ill equipped. I do not have the tools, because I was not given the tools. I was not taught the tools to be able to do this. No one is. And in most, in most circumstances, most people are not prepared, particularly for entrepreneurship. Like no one teaches you how to deal with your money in a way that needs to reflect your complete shift in identity and your complete shift in circumstances. So I think highly sensitive, the challenging part was like I was being extremely hard on myself and in these deep shame spirals. But the positive side of that was that I was able to intuitively sense like what I needed, and intuitively sense like being guided to you and to the different resources that were going to pull me through, or like help me and support me in the ways that I wasn't previously getting. There's other ways I think being highly sensitive, like I know for me that because I'm so sensitive to the world around me that, I know you asked about social justice at some point and like the intersection of all of that. I don't know if you wanted to get to that, but the way that being highly sensitive is impacted that is that because I can feel so deeply around of the pain of the world of like what's happening. I often want my money. I want to make enough money where I can like make a change. Like I want my money so often to not go necessarily just toward me. I want it to go toward the world that I want to see, because I'm like, there's so much happening in this world where like this would actually fund money in this direction and used in this way would be super helpful. And I can't not feel that.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I remember when I was learning about HSPs. It's like that desire for social justice, because we do tend to be more permeable. Other people's pain, we feel it. So we're trying to like solve it or make things better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just generally like that part of being highly sensitive. A lot of people can, even if you're highly sensitive, you can try to tune that out. I think you tune out a lot of other stuff when you do that. When you suppress that, I would like to say a healthy empathetic response, not the toxic empathy where you're like absorbing everyone else's stuff, but the healthy response of like, wow, like I feel this and I generally want to make a change. How can I make this better? How can I think beyond myself? How can I support this thing? And that's where I feel like highly sensitive and finances often overlap, is like I don't want my money just to go towards me. I want it to go towards these other things. And then I guess the less collective viewpoint is that, being highly sensitive sometimes is expensive. Okay. Like I need a lot of things to thrive. Like I need different supplements. I need different, like, what I mean? Like I need body work. I need things that, because my body moves differently in the world, I have to do a lot to maintain myself. And not all of it requires money, but a good amount does. And like when I need help beyond me to make sure that I can thrive, so that I can help the world in the way that I want to help. But I can't do it from this depleted cup. And it can be very easy to become depleted as a highly sensitive person. And so it's also like, how can I get my money right so that I can take care of myself in a way where I'm not going to massive debt? such that I can like impact the world and make the impact that I want to make.
Yeah, and I think for me, like one of the things that I recognize now is how much rest I need.
Totally. I'm about to nap after this podcast.
Yeah, and it just means that like when you are able to work, our work is great, but it's like making sure that it's productive and that it's financially lucrative.
Yeah.
So I don't want this to feel like a commercial of my work with you, but I do want to hear like how did our work impact you? And also, like, maybe one of the tools that I use to teach, and by the time season two comes out, I'll have it available. But one of the tools I use to teach is money archetypes. And there's a quiz available where you can kind of find out what your archetype is. And you were part of the first cohort where I was teaching this new idea that I had. And just like as a brief overview of them, there's five. There's the coppice, which is the giving tree. There's the magnolia, which is always blooming. It's kind of like the showy one. There's the saguaro, which is always kind of hoarding money. They're very well prepared, but they're also like not allowing themselves any pleasure. There's heaven's tree, which is really trying to create a different system. That'll be like a tree that'll show up where there's no green spaces. So they're much more like the activist money archetype. And then there's a wisteria, which hardly thinks about money. They just kind of shoot out leaves and figure out what's next once it happens. And they're very innovative, but they can also be a little like naive when it comes to money. And I think it was like you immediately knew you were like wisteria. That's it.
Immediately. Immediately. Immediately knew. It was no questions. I was like,
And
I am a
yeah,
Wisteria.
share a little bit more about like how that framing has been helpful and whether it continues to be helpful now.
1000%. I was actually just thinking about this on a walk on Sunday, walking through my neighborhood and realizing that this apartment, condo, whatever, had wisteria growing in front of it. And I had never really realized it before, but I was like, oh, that's wisteria. And it was perfect timing because I'm going through a period right now where, in my work with you, what I realized was that I need structure. Like I need structures. Otherwise, with like the wisteria, it completely gets out of control. Wisteria will grow and like take over everything and will kill its host. It will literally kill the thing that it's attached to. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, yeah, I have learned that if I don't have certain structures in place for financially and in my life, that I become almost out of control in some ways. And I don't mean like, emotionally like I just mean like making perhaps not sound decisions and maybe just kind of being like flippant almost, like flippant with money. There's like you said, there's this really amazing aspect of the Wisteria that's like, I'm gonna make this happen. Like I'm gonna go like get all these opportunities and I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna leap and I'm gonna figure it out. It's great. Also, though, it's chaotic. Like it can be extraordinarily chaotic and like deeply hectic. And so what I realize is that in these periods where I don't have as much structure, I can already feel the like swirliness. I can feel the part of me that wants to just kind of be like, whatever, I'll figure it out, which is okay for a certain amount of time. And I do think Wisteria can figure it out, but I do need to have a structure of some kind. Like we can't just be quote unquote figuring it out. And my structures, I think what's important is that like the structure can change. The structure can change, but there are certain structures that that I don't think I will change because I'm like, this is the concrete. Like Wisteria needs literal concrete and like the trestles or whatever so that it grows in the right way. Like it needs a lot of stability and support. And it's so beautiful when it has it. It curves, it drapes, it does this amazing kind of like artistry with itself, but it's because it has the support to do so. And so for me, having different support structures has been imperative. So I don't like suffocate my own self or my bank account or, anything else that I am, like using to support myself.
Yeah. And I think sometimes as highly sensitive people, it's like when we're learning a new skill, maybe this is just a hypothesis, but like we have to learn it very
Yeah.
thoroughly, right? Sometimes it's like I have to go through the extreme of like, what does it look like for this to not work?
Mhm.
For me to even realize like what could it look like if it works. Could you share like a couple of structures that you use now for any Wisterias out there listening?
Yes. Well, two things. I guess I would say that I have a separate bank business account that's completely separate from my personal account. And, for me, I know, I've talked about this, but I have a very, as you know, detailed budget. I have a very detailed budget. And I actually need that level of detail to see where exactly is my money going, because that was a huge thing for me. I was like, I just don't know where it's going. I have general kind of sweeping ideas, but I literally need like exactly how much am I going to be spending on food? Like, I think that is a huge structure. Otherwise, it can get really like, yeah, it's like roughly this amount. And then, quote unquote, roughly this amount is suddenly like three times what you should be spending. So I think details, specifically being very detailed in my budget for now in my life, is really, really important. I also look at it, multiple times a month just to see where am I at with it. So I pre-designate the money that goes. So my personal account is divided into separate sections like food, entertainment, self-care, and I pre-put in the amount of money that I can spend for the month. Like that's it. And there is no going over that. And I'm like very clear with myself at this point that there is no going over that. And so that's a huge structure that I have. It's not like, oh, let's see what I have for this month. It's like, no, this is how much you have. Then you see how much you can do for the month. And then the second thing I would say is with each paycheck in my business account, a certain percent goes automatically to certain things. So there's a percent that goes to savings that I don't see. There's a percent that goes to taxes that I don't see. And then there's a percent that goes to profit, like business profit. So there's just like, and I don't see those things. I don't touch them unless it's, emergencies or whatever. So yeah, those are things I think that have kept me in order. Well,
Yeah, creating like a really clear lattice
very
for you
clear,
to grow around.
very clear. I've realized that money needs to feel safe with me. Like that's important. And I don't think money was safe with me before. And the way that I feel safe with money and money feels safe with me, it knows exactly where it's going and exactly how it will be used. And then there's a lot more respect. We have a mutual respect for one another when I'm not like abusing it essentially or not, paying enough attention to it.
Oh, what about another thing that I remember working with you on was like the what it felt like to have money, to like
Oh
hold
Lord.
reserves, to hold like to build the concrete for the Wisteria. Oh, I'm thinking of like when you were like saying that money felt like a hot potato, like holding cash felt like a hot potato. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah. Very much.
Being able to like have the emergency fund, have the cash cushion needed, especially for a wisteria where and especially as an entrepreneur because income can be very, very unpredictable. And I remember when we were doing some like somatic awarenessing around like what does it feel like to hold money? And you used the term hot potato. Like it felt like a hot potato, just wanted to throw it away as soon as possible. What was it like for that to transform? And what does it feel like now?
Well, I guess I'll give a little context as to I think why it felt like a hot potato. I think part of it was that I didn't feel like I could be responsible enough to hold money. I think I didn't trust myself to know what to do with it and like not even just be responsible, but also be like almost strategic and informed as well, because how you being responsible with money from when you have a 9 to 5 is different than being responsible with money when you are more like just fundamentally different. Um, perspectives of responsibility. And so I just, I had never really, I don't think, transitioned into an entrepreneurial mindset. And so I didn't trust myself. And so I was always, yeah, that hot potato came from the sensation of like, well, if I just get rid of it, then I don't have to deal with it, which is so backwards. And so, but it's your brain thinking it's protecting you. Like if you know what I mean, it's like I had to, you were so helpful in helping me move through the shame of that. Cause I was like, why do I feel like that? And so I think what was really helpful was, yeah, like having more conversation with myself around and locating for myself moments when I have been really trustworthy with money. Like I actually am responsible. I am a responsible person. I just need a little bit more help and some resources and reframe. But like, I'm not a bad person. I'm not this reckless person. This is, something I need to work on. So the more that was able to trust myself in knowing what to do with money, as well as balancing, there's the thing in the manifestation, quote unquote, for the manifestation girlies and like the wellness world of like, spend money and it'll show up, or like just take, trust it, pull out this money and like more will come, but you have to spend more to like get more and all that kind of stuff. And while I think in some moments that is perhaps appropriate, like that can't be the ongoing experience when you don't have the money and you constantly believe, well, if I just spend this, it'll show the universe that I'm ready to receive. And if I just spend this, even if I don't have it, it'll come back to me threefold. And I just think that's a really dangerous thing to play with if you don't have like correct structures in place, or you don't, you know what I mean? Like that's the pattern, but it keeps not turning out the way that you think it's going to turn out, then that's probably not the direction. And I'm saying this from personal experience, right? Like of getting into credit card debt, constantly thinking, if I just spend this with one more teacher, or if I just spend it on like one more course, that'll be the thing that changes everything. And so I had to kind of stop these patterns and rebuild my own trust with myself so that I didn't have this experience of like, I have to get rid of money. That's the only way that I can properly deal with it versus what if I just held on to it and dealt with it that way?
Yeah, yeah. And it also reminds me of what you said about your parents like refinancing the home
Oh
multiple
my God,
times.
totally.
A little bit of that feeling of like, well, it's coming, or let's just enjoy it before it's here. And I totally get that. It's like we do, again, as entrepreneurs, we do have to believe in our abilities. We do have to be ambitious. There's something beautiful around that. And learning how to balance that with restraint or structure, or even like knowing what does enough feel like in your body, right? More is not always the answer.
I love that. Yes. What does enough feel like in your body? And my friend Jez and I were talking about like, what even is abundance? What do we mean when we say abundance? Like it's like this vague like thing that the wellness world and all kind of adopted, but like what does enoughness feel like in your body? What does abundance feel like in your body? What do you actually need? Like really, what do you actually need? And reframing, yeah, like what does abundance mean for you? Like abundance for me and enoughness for me is that I can easily pay my bills and have a little bit left over to, give to the organizations that I want to give to, like maybe have a little bit of padding to help friends. That would be awesome. Save up for travel, but like it's not this like exorbitant amount where I'm like calling in like $30,000 a month. Yeah, that'd be awesome. But like, is that enough? Like that's beyond enough, right? Like that's, what I'm saying? Like it's just redefining because that's also like learning to decolonize yourself and decolonize your experience with money.
Yeah, yeah. One of my gripes around abundance is that it feels energetically similar to scarcity, because in abundance you're always looking for more. There's actually no way that you could be satisfied if you're just focused on having more.
Right.
Just like with scarcity, you're so afraid of not having more
Mm,
that like the fear is the thing that you're focusing on. And enoughness is one of those things where, like, so you mentioned earlier that being highly sensitive can be expensive, but it can also, in some ways, like, I think of like some of the ways that I recharge are like being outside
Yeah.
in the sun quietly. You know, there's some ways that are so efficient to recharge because I am sensing like peace outside of me, and like next thing you know, and I'm like, oh, I feel peaceful, you know,
Yeah.
just being so permeable. So it's, and that's, I think that's like a whole structural thing. Like capitalism doesn't want us to have enough because then if we had enough, we wouldn't keep buying, right? And the whole system wants us to continue consuming. So like we have a system that's very like addiction prone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I remember working together and looking at your budget and being as someone who like identifies as a Saguaro, I was like, when I was doing that, I was hurting myself. I was actually too
Yeah.
restrictive.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful that for you, like it helped you develop more of those Saguaro skills. And it's just been supportive. It just goes to show that like money is a psychology question. So everybody answers it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I particularly think saguaros and wisterias are like two sides of the same, like they need each other, you know? Like I think that they very much balance each other. My best friend is a saguaro, and I know that we constantly are learning from each other. I'll constantly be like, thank God I have this person in my life that can balance when I'm like, and then this could happen and we could go do this. And I'm like, okay, but are we grounded enough to do that? Do we actually have the resources? And then she is always like, looking at the ways in which she doesn't think bigger, or she doesn't think that that's possible, or is constantly like, expecting kind of the worst, where I'm like, or it could be this great. So I think those two particularly are such amazing balances for each other, and all of them, just because we're one thing. I think that was something I learned from you really well, was just because you are fundamentally this one archetype doesn't mean that you can't tap into the gifts or the challenges of the other one to support yourself and to expand.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's was what when I was introducing this, that's kind of the goal of like integrating other archetypes and being more balanced. Because if you only have one that you're leading with, you have all of the gifts, but you also have all of the challenges of that one. And they all can kind of be, they can all balance each other out. It just depends what each person needs. I know for myself as a Saguaro, tapping into Magnolia was super
Mhm.
helpful. I was just like allowing myself to enjoy the money that I was making, to enjoy, to like use some of my savings and not feel so fearful.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think I at one point went too far into the saguaro. I think you even reminded me, you were like, just make sure you're still like tapping into the wisteria gifts and not being like full saguaro. So yeah, I think that's really correct what you just said.
Yeah. And money is one of the leading causes of like mental health stress.
Mhm.
And as highly sensitive people, like sometimes because money can be painful and difficult, like we just 100% avoid it. So I really congratulate you on working on your money and like being so much, like you've made so much progress and like living a life now that really supports you, that's sustainable, that like supports you as an HSP, as a Wisteria.
Thank you. I truly could not have done it without you. I still use so many of your archetypes and tools. I was just talking about archetype with someone. I think someone who is either reaching out to you or had already reached out. And I was like, oh, did you learn about the archetype? I'm just always, excited to share this work. I think it's really, yeah, it's really profound. So I'm grateful for all your support in my money journey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And it's just been like, because I want to be gentle. Like I know I can see how scared people can be around this. So it's like, how do we make it softer? How do we make it gentler? How do we make it more palatable? Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were working together this last time on like private coaching, you were going through that stage of like learning your saguaro
Yeah.
skills. And there was a point in there where I remember you forgot that you could have more streams of income, that you could increase your income. You forgot like your wisteria nest.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear how are you integrating both like holding the money,
Yeah.
right? Being responsible with it and also making the money.
I don't really answer that. Well, I think also what comes into mind is the intersection of being a projector as well, which obviously I'm not going to get into, but being a projector and then and then just the natural cycles of entrepreneurship. So I'm coming out of a cycle right now where I was so focused on creating all these income streams that I did. And it was really, it was the first time I think in a long time that I was in this like flow of opportunities. And while some of that I think was timing, I think some of that was, just the shifts that I was making. And at the same time, like I got tired. Like I got really tired. So now now I'm in like a mini rest phase, which is like important as a highly sensitive person, but I'm aware of like, okay, now it's time to not to get too comfortable in the wisteria, the shadow wisteria, like I'll figure it out, right? Like now we actually, at some point I am going to have to start to figure out again these opportunities. But I feel like the balance in these moments right now where there's not as many things coming in. This is not the time where suddenly you're just like spending, it's almost like this is a time when there might be a little bit, yes, of course, like live life, but this is not a moment where we're just gonna go and be like, and now I'm gonna like go use all the fruits of my labor. This is where I feel like there is this legato aspect of like, yeah, while I'm gonna go be a Wisteria and figure out the next, you know, things that are coming in, let's make sure that we're still grounded and we're still like using our budget and adjusting our budget accordingly to account for lulls what do happen. Like there are going to be moments where like there's going to be not as much work. Like it happens. And so instead of seeing that as like something's wrong, it's like, okay, how do I reconfigure my structures to support myself while I'm going and being a wisteria and, bringing in the next batch of things that are going to create more streams of income.
And one of the gifts we mentioned this beginning, a gift of like being highly sensitive is that we receive more information.
Yeah.
And as we learn to listen to ourselves more, right? Because if you just came through a stage where you were like more on the income generating and now you're like, I need rest, being able to hear that and trust it can be so difficult. Again, as an
Totally.
entrepreneur where you don't have the 9 to 5, you're like, if I rest, will I have anything come in?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I will say it is challenging. It is still challenging, even with all of the ways I've decolonized and undone the corporate mindset. Like it's in my bones and my DNA. It's in the water that we drink, the air that we breathe. Do not rest.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a constant. It's
Right.
still a constant practice. It's still a constant battle. To be like, lay your ass down, go take a nap. Like you've created enough to like have a little bit of space, and this is not the time to just throw all your structures out the window just because I think that's what happened before when I would be in these lulls. I would be like, well, fuck it, you know I'm gonna do what I want to do kind of mentality. And that's where I've had to kind of rein myself and the Wisterian. It's like that's not quite it. Like, is that really self-care? The like quote unquote fuck it mentality is not really loving. But resting is caring and loving while we figure out, these other things, but we can still be responsible with money while we're in a period of rest.
Yeah. Yeah. The superpower of like being able to listen well.
Yeah, listen to yourself above the noise of our very chaotic and very loud culture.
Yeah. And what is it that, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact term, but you're an energy hygienist. And like as an energy hygienist, right? You're like helping people keep their energy clear, their energy clean.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of you know that there's a lot of noise that people are dealing with.
Yes, self-included. I'm constantly having to filter out the noise. It's chaotic times in these streets. It's chaotic.
All right. Well, Bianca, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Is there anything so maybe one thing to add on is like how can people find your work? If anyone out there is like ready to feel more balanced as a highly sensitive person, how can they find your work? What are your favorite ways of working with people? And who do you love working with?
Yeah, I mean, as an EFT or emotional freedom technique practitioner, my specialty is working with highly sensitive professionals and highly sensitive creatives. I would say the most creative are essentially highly sensitive. And that's my one-on-one work. I do that in groups as well. I support organizations in regulating the nervous system of the folks there and also like dealing with conflict. So you can work with me one-on-one in EFT session, or you can work with me in group capacity with EFT, or you can work with me in a group capacity around conflict and conflict transformation. So you can find me. I try to not do as much on the socials, but if you are on the socials, it's Bianca Gabrielle Wilson for all of my social media channels and my website, biancagabrielle.com, where you can just email me at bianca@biancagabrielle.com, but all that's on my website too.
Yeah. And I'll include the links to your social and your website on the show notes so people can find it there.
Yeah, and I have a newsletter. The newsletter's pretty great. I took a little hiatus from it, but it'll be back in a couple of weeks. So that's also a good place to connect with me. I speak more there.
And you also have self-guided courses.
I do have self-guided courses. I have a YouTube channel. My YouTube channel will be active again starting like this week. That's actually where a lot of people find me, which is so funny because I don't YouTube's like not my thing, but apparently it's other people's thing. But yeah, the self-guided courses are, really accessible. I try to make them really, easy and simple to follow. And then I have just free videos on my YouTube for people to follow if they're interested in learning emotional freedom technique or tapping. There's a lot of videos where you can literally tap in for free.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode in the second season of Highly Sensitive Money, where we talk about money, social justice, and how to do this well as a highly sensitive person. To learn more about my services, check out my website, allthecolors.net, where you can also find a really fun link to a quiz on money archetypes, because understanding our own patterns with money makes it much easier to make changes and get to where we want to go. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.